So our speaker tonight is Nicky Ison, and she's going to talk about hydrogen and the great opportunities that hydrogen presents to us. Nicky, I've known Nicky for quite a while. She's currently the Energy Transitions Manager for WWF Australia. Prior to that, for a number of years, she was with the Institute of Sustainable Futures at UTS as a research consultant. She's also one of the founding directors, I think, of the Community Power Agency. Is that right, Nicky?
Yes,
indeed. And I remember her from even before then at 100% Renewables, which became Solar Citizens. So I think Nicky's sort of not only, you know, full-time working in the field, but also her spare time. It's a day job, an evening job, a night job, and everything else. So she certainly knows her subject. And the subject is, in fact, hydrogen and renewable energy. Consider the possibilities. So I'm going to hand over to Nicky right away.
thanks, Dominic. Lovely to be with you all at Climate Change Balmain-Rozelle. I have had connections with CCVR for probably 12 years or more now, since Jenny and you, Dominic, first founded it back in the day. And I live across the way in Stanmore. So I would also like to acknowledge that I live and work on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. So as Dominic mentioned, I'm the Energy Transition Manager at WWF Australia, and as part of that, my goal, the goal of WWF Australia, is to accelerate Australia to be the world's leading renewable export nation by 2030. And if you know anything about renewable exports, you probably know that one of our biggest renewable export opportunities is around hydrogen. So in the last year, I've been doing quite a bit of work on hydrogen. I suppose the thing to say about where I sit on hydrogen is I think there are a lot of hydrogen zealots, and we may have one or two on the call. And there are many people in the climate movement who are very skeptical of hydrogen. What I would like to suggest is what I'm going to present today is a middle path that talks about both the pros and cons of hydrogen. So I'm going to share some slides. Give me 1 second. Here we go. People can see that, right? Dominic, if you can give me a thumbs up.
Yep.
Great. So I'm going to talk about the what, why and how of hydrogen, and I hope you find it interesting. I'll talk for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and then we can have a bit of a Q&A and a discussion around it. So firstly, what is hydrogen? You probably all know, but just in case you don't, hydrogen is the smallest molecule in the universe, the smallest atom in the universe, and forms one of the smallest molecules in the universe in the form of H2. It's one proton and one electron, and it's incredibly energy dense, not as energy dense as some of the fuels that we have in production, such as and things like that, but it's a pretty energy dense form of molecule. A couple of things to note about hydrogen: it doesn't occur naturally in the Earth. It only occurs in compounds with other molecules, so in the form of water and H2O and things like that. So it's something that needs to be made. It's not something that can be mined. Also when you combust it, when you burn it, it burns cleanly in the sense that it does not produce fossil fuel, carbon dioxide or any other similar pollutant. When you burn it, it combines with oxygen to form water. So hydrogen goes to oxygen to water, and that means it's not a greenhouse gas pollutant. So why should climate activists care about hydrogen? So I don't know if you can see it very well, but on the right hand side I've put Australia's emissions by sector The blue ones, the orange one, the purple and the green are all total energy. So there are electricity, our industry emissions, our transport emissions, our fugitive emissions, industrial process emissions, and they're all to do with the use of fossil fuels. So, and they account for somewhere between 80 to 85% of Australia's domestic greenhouse gas emissions. So the decarbonisation of the energy system is critical. You know, we can't act on climate change unless we decarbonise energy. And I don't just mean electricity. There's a lot of focus in the climate movement around moving away from coal power and getting to 100% renewables. Now that is foundational and a really critical first step. But we need to go beyond that, and we need to start thinking bigger and going, it's not just about electricity, it's also about transport, it's also about industry. And so what are the solutions that we have to decarbonise our total energy system, both here in Australia and globally? And it's actually not rocket science. There's basically 4 key steps. The first is energy and resource efficiency. So we need to use less energy and use it more efficiently, but also we need to create less stuff and use the stuff that we have more efficiently. And that's what I mean by resources. Then we need to build a heap of firmed renewable capacity with storage, geographical distribution, flexible demand, a whole bunch of things. And then we need to use that renewables and storage to power not just our electricity needs, but the electrification of transport, heating and industry. So buildings, transport and industry sectors. So electrification is the next step. And then finally, there are a few sectors where it will be very hard to electrify. And that's where renewable hydrogen comes in. For the countries and industries that are hard to electrify, renewable hydrogen is the thing that helps fill the gap, that gets us from anywhere between 60 to 85% renewable generation across total energy to 100% renewables across total energy, which we actually talk about as 300% renewables. I'll get to that. So how is hydrogen made? Hydrogen is made in 3 different ways. The first is it's used, and the biggest way it's made globally at the moment is through a process called steam reforming of methane, which is where they take gas, fossil gas, and they run it through a chemical process and catalyzer, and out comes hydrogen. The second process is using coal and stripping hydrogen out of coal to form to create pure hydrogen. And then the third type is renewable hydrogen. So using water and renewable electricity to split water into its constituent molecules, hydrogen and oxygen. And so the first 2 processes from coal and gas both produce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide in the process. So they are a polluting way of generating hydrogen. The electrolysis mechanism, which is where you use electricity to split water, if the electricity used is from renewable sources, is a 0 emission pathway to generate hydrogen. So the thing to say about hydrogen is it's actually a very large global industry already. There's a lot of talk about how hydrogen is the big next thing. It's already a big existing thing. This is a report by Wood Mackenzie about a year ago, a global energy consulting firm. And what it shows is that the global hydrogen industry that currently exists accounts for more carbon dioxide pollution than Germany, than the global shipping industry, than global aviation. So it's actually a big pollutant, and it accounts for about 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So only slightly less than Australia, in terms of our domestic emissions. And what hydrogen is mainly used for at the moment is the synthesis of a chemical called ammonia, which is used in the production of fertilizer and explosives and a number of other processes and chemicals in the chemical industry. And in fact, ammonia is one of the sort of top 10 most globally traded commodities worldwide. So it's actually a big industry. We just don't know very much about it because it's the feedstock industry rather than one that is a consumer facing industry. Hydrogen is also used in the refining of oil. So we'll see the reduction in hydrogen use in that process as we start to electrify transport around the world and move away from petrol. And then it's also used in methanol production, which is, you know, if you have methylated spirits and you use that for, you know, cleaning your house or something like that. And there are a few other applications. So those are the existing applications of hydrogen that are happening worldwide and have been happening for decades, if not 100 years. But what are the potential applications of hydrogen? And this is where a lot of people get very excited, because hydrogen is quite a versatile potential fuel. Not only can it be used as a chemical feedstock to create ammonia, so that bubble, which is what it already is, it could potentially be used in heating processes. It could be used for transport purposes, to power ships and trucks and trains, maybe even cars. It could be used as a form of storage that can be then burnt in converted gas peaking plant to help balance electricity when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. We all know that, you know, we need storage, and it's essentially a form of storage. And then, of course, it's an export opportunity for Australia. It could also be used in remote sites and a whole range of different applications. But I think one of the things that is important to note is that not all applications will be competitive from hydrogen. So currently, if I go back to this slide, steam reforming of methane, the gas pathway, is the most prevalent way we generate hydrogen globally. And at the moment, the renewable hydrogen pathway is a number of times more expensive than that gas pathway. So one of the biggest challenges we have is how do we bring renewable hydrogen down the cost curve so it outcompetes hydrogen from coal and gas. One more comment that I'll make about this slide is there's a lot of talk about the different colours of hydrogen. There's blue hydrogen, there's green hydrogen, there's brown hydrogen, there's grey hydrogen. I would recommend you don't talk about hydrogen in different colours. Currently, the term blue hydrogen is used to apply to hydrogen from coal and gas combined with CCS. We think that that's a pretty unlikely to be a cost competitive pathway in the long term compared to renewable hydrogen, which will be much more modular and come down the cost curve much more quickly. And then the second reason is it actually just provides an excuse to continue extracting fossil fuels, which we know are the biggest form of main cause of climate change. So the gas industry particularly has had quite a success in marketing itself as, you know, part of a transition fuel and hydrogen as a transition pathway for gas networks. And I think that's pretty problematic. And so what we are encouraging people when they talk about hydrogen is to just be really clear. There are two types of hydrogen. There's hydrogen from renewables, or renewable hydrogen, and there's hydrogen from fossil fuels, or hydrogen from coal and gas. And the coal and gas pathway exacerbates climate change, and the renewable pathway is a solution to climate change. So there are sort of two dimensions in which hydrogen is more nuanced than, say, transforming the electricity sector, where it's pretty easy. You go, we need to shut coal-fired power stations and replace them with renewables and storage. For hydrogen, you've got to first worry about how it's made, and then you need to think about, is hydrogen the most efficient application or solution to this particular decarbonisation challenge? So we've done some work evaluating the potential applications of hydrogen. And the questions that we ask is the renewable hydrogen technology available for use for this use case soon? Or is it likely to be available in the long term? And that's really, does the technology for this sector exist? Does the technology to use hydrogen in ships, or use hydrogen, you know, export hydrogen, or use hydrogen in domestic appliances like your stovetop, does that technology exist now? And is it likely to exist in the future? That's the first question. It's a technical question. And then the second question, is an alternative zero carbon pathway likely to be more cost effective, functional, as negative analysis?
So I'm just asking Nicky to unmute again.
Hi everyone, sorry, my internet dropped out. Blame the NBN. Where did people hear up to?
We probably only missed about 60 seconds. So if you go back to your share slides, we should be right.
Okay. So I was saying about how we're evaluating the potential applications of hydrogen. And so let's use this analysis, this graph by Renew, formerly the Alternative Technology Association, and they've compared the efficiency of an electric car to a hydrogen fuel cell car. And what you can see is that top pathway is that battery electric cars are 77% efficient, as in they convert electric, the primary energy from the renewable generation to the propulsion of the vehicle. Only 33% or 23% of the energy is lost. Whereas if you look at a hydrogen fuel cell, more than 60% of the energy is lost in the round trip efficiency associated with the production and use of hydrogen. So it is much more likely from a technical efficiency perspective than an electric vehicle, particularly in a country like Australia, where we have such amazing and abundant renewable resources and don't need to import any fuels. We can use and generate them all ourselves, but an electric pathway is going to be much more applicable than a hydrogen pathway for some applications, particularly domestic applications, so household cars, household cooking and heating and things like that. So based on this analysis, we've identified 3 of the best long-term hydrogen opportunities and 3 of the best short-term hydrogen opportunities. So the first is in the production of green building materials. So steel, for example, the steel production accounts for about 6 to 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's because in the making of steel, you use coking coal. And what we are seeing research and pilot projects show in places around the world is that you can replace coking coal with a hydrogen pathway. And so we're seeing some pilot projects in Sweden and in Germany. And the question is, can Australia, as the world's leading exporter of iron ore, start to generate a green steel industry using our renewable hydrogen potential in Australia to generate and make green steel onshore? Similarly, alumina, so when we make aluminium, it's a 2-stage process. You refine bauxite, the raw mineral, into alumina, and then alumina into aluminium. Now the aluminium path, the second part of that mainly uses electricity, and that's the part we know about. But the first part, we do some of that here in Australia, and that process requires very high temperature processes, and that will be quite difficult to electrify. And so renewable hydrogen could be a really good way of generating the heat that is needed to refine these metals and create these different green building materials. And that's actually an area that we are doing some work around at WWF. My colleague Monica Richter has got a new initiative that is looking at how do we create demand for zero emissions green building materials, structure projects and building, home building companies procure and create demand for these zero emission building materials. So that's the first opportunity, and it's actually a really huge opportunity for Australia. The second is for zero emission fuels for shipping and potentially some other long haul transport like trucks and mining trucks, where batteries are not energy dense enough and will probably not last long enough. You'll be able to take an electric ferry from Circular Quay to Manly, but you won't be able to take an electric cargo ship from Newcastle to China. We're going to need a different zero emission fuel opportunity. And the one that is looking most promising is actually the use of ammonia or hydrogen, but probably ammonia as a fuel. for the shipping industry. So that's an area where, you know, we could go from being a net importer of oil to a net exporter, powering the global shipping industry. And interestingly, the largest shipping hub in the world and shipping refueling place in the world is Singapore. And Singapore does not have a lot of renewables or a lot of land, and they are already in talks with the Australian government about how they can work with us to provide renewable hydrogen and maybe renewable ammonia for Singapore. And then the final area that we see as a really big opportunity is the export of hydrogen to other countries. And I'm going to come back to that and talk a little bit more about that in the long term as a big opportunity. Then there's the short-term market opportunities. So the long-term market opportunities, I would expect we would see operating demonstration projects at scale by 2025. And then between 2025 and 2035, we're starting to see the rollout and scale up of these technologies. But we're probably not going to see renewable hydrogen be cost competitive until 2030 or thereabouts, because we still need to bring the cost of both electrolyzers and renewables and electricity itself down the cost curve. Then the short-term market opportunities for us, they're really about how do you create the scale? How do you create the demand and the scale that will help bring renewable hydrogen down the cost curve and make it cost competitive? So the first opportunity we see is through decarbonising the existing hydrogen applications, such as fertiliser and explosives. And one of the challenges here is there's quite a big cost differential between for this application, but there is a big opportunity because the technology already exists. They already use hydrogen. It's not like they're converting from gas to hydrogen. They're just replacing one type of hydrogen with a zero emissions form of hydrogen. The second is around heavy transport. We were talking to some financiers and they thought that, you know, there was quite a good opportunity to replace expensive diesel in remote mines and remote communities with renewable hydrogen. So that particularly where the renewables is excellent, which is in most of remote Australia. And then the final area, and this is a little bit contentious, is around gas injection of hydrogen into the gas grid. Now, we don't want to see hydrogen used as an excuse to extend the life of the gas industry. So what we're saying is that we would only support this idea of, you know, injecting some renewable hydrogen into the gas grid if a state government was also pursuing significant electrification programs. And we've started to see that happen just in the last month. So in Victoria, they have committed to looking to funding replacement of old and inefficient gas heaters and other forms of heaters with efficient electric heat pumps as a more efficient solution. So we're starting to see some movement there. Final few things that I want to say is, so let's talk about Australia's renewable advantage. We have some of the best renewable resources in the world. It's Australia, parts of Africa, Chile, and parts of the Western United States, where you have both amazing solar and wind resources, a bit of Western China as well. But we are one of the places that is A, more accessible than some places, and B, we don't have a high population base and we have a large land mass. So there is a huge opportunity that we can have to help decarbonise other countries. And if you look at Japan and South Korea, for example, which are two of our largest fossil fuel trading partners, they import most of our coal and the largest share of our coal and gas after China. They are you know, they don't have a lot of land, they don't have a lot of sunshine, it's pretty mountainous, and they have large populations and large industry bases. They are literally going to need our help to decarbonise. And so hydrogen presents a really significant opportunity for those countries to decarbonise where they might have a limited access to onshore renewable resources. So that's why we at WWF are running a campaign to make Australia 700% renewables. And just to explain what we mean by that, So 100% renewables is where we decarbonise and go to renewables for our existing electricity needs. 300% renewables is where we decarbonise our total domestic energy use. So, you know, gas for heating your home is converted to renewable electricity heating, and transport and industry as well. And then 300 to 700% is that then export potential, and that renewables we build to export renewables. And so I think the final thing that I want to, or second to final thing I want to talk about is we see renewable hydrogen as a huge opportunity, but it is only one opportunity amongst many. When we talk at WWF around renewable exports, we talk about 6 types of renewable exports. Renewable hydrogen and its derivatives like ammonia is the first. But then there's the idea of undersea cables, like the Sun Cable project in the Northern Territory. The idea of onshoring manufacturing, such as green steel production, and the creation of renewable powered products. You know, so embodied renewable energy in products that we then ship offshore. And then there is sort of the ecosystem that sits around the renewables industry. So our expertise, the components that we can make. You know, we are the world's largest exporter of lithium, for example. Could we onshore and make batteries here in Australia? And finally, software and services. I won't go into that because I'm running out of time. I'll finish up here, but we can talk. The thing that I don't have a slide for is the state of play. I'll run through that in a section. So WWF's position on hydrogen, we are very supportive of hydrogen and actively advocating for it, but we have some conditions on it. One is that it's renewable only. 2, that it's traceable, so we know its point of origin and can confirm its renewables. That stringent public, worker and environmental safety practices are being adopted because hydrogen is highly flammable and its derivatives like ammonia are environmental, you know, pollutants. So we need to be very careful. The fourth area is that it's being developed in accordance with sustainability principles. So we want to make sure that it's you know, not using up significant water resources and it's doing, you know, managing water sustainably. 6, it's being pursued as a complementary strategy to electrification. So we don't see hydrogen as a replacement for electrification, rather a complement to it. And then finally, we don't want the hydrogen industry to be like the LNG industry, where we now export 80% of our LNG or our gas reserves offshore, and we pay more than they pay in places like Japan and South Korea. We want to make sure that the hydrogen industry helps lower power bills and energy bills for Australians. And there's absolutely a way to do that. And actually, hydrogen is really complementary to renewables, and it helps soak up excess renewables, and so can help you know, pay for the cost of that excess build that we need. I will just go into the state of play. I don't have a slide on it. The thing to say about renewable hydrogen is globally there's a land grab going on for it. We are seeing significant investments by Saudi Arabia, by China, by different places in Europe, Spain, Germany, the UK. There's stuff happening in the US. Japan is very interested in hydrogen, but mainly from an import perspective and a technology perspective, rather than generating it. And then in Australia, we obviously have the National Hydrogen Strategy that was developed by Dr. Finkel, and then had the buy-in from all state and territories. But we are starting to see hydrogen programs in every state and territory. So it's one of the top 5 priorities in the federal government's technology roadmap. In Queensland, we now have a Minister for Energy, Renewables and Hydrogen and an Assistant Minister for Hydrogen. The Greens and your local member, if you live in Balmain-Rozelle, Jamie Parker, has just helped secure in New South Wales a $50 million funding commitment from the New South Wales government to renewable hydrogen. The Victorian government has announced a $108 million program that will include renewable hydrogen. Tasmania has a $50 million renewable hydrogen program. South Australia, which was the first state to develop a hydrogen strategy, is in the very much in the demonstration process at the moment. And Western Australia has also got some hydrogen development programs going on. And then, of course, there's the Asia Renewable Energy Hub, which will be the world's largest power station, the mega renewables project in northwest Western Australia, and that will include the export and use of significant generation of significant renewable hydrogen capacity. So there is a lot happening in Australia, and that is exciting. But if we don't keep the momentum going and grow it substantially, then other places will outspend us, and that will more than compensate for the fact that we have some of the best renewable resources in the world, and thus some of the potentially cheapest renewable hydrogen in the world. And on that note, I will finish and let people ask questions. I hope that pitched it at the right level of technicality, and I apologise if it was too technical.
Nicky, that's absolutely fabulous, and I want to do a visual sort of bit of applause for that right away. And then we can thank you, everybody. Look, a few questions, in fact, several questions have been popping up on the side margin on my screen here. And funnily enough, as they've popped up, you've come on and covered an awful lot of them, but there are still quite a few things that you might be able to tick off, some of them fairly quickly, I think. And they group into several categories. And the first ones, I might say, are sort of the basic chemistry. And in particular, a lot of people have got a bit confused or worried or interested about the ammonia angle. Hydrogen, of course, we know as, you know, people might think of the Hindenburg, for example, of hydrogen.
Yeah, sure.
As obviously there are some safety issues there. It's extremely flammable, and as somebody said, you can't bottle it terribly easily. What are the issues there, and how is ammonia an answer to that? How do you convert hydrogen to ammonia? And I won't do too many questions all at once, but how do you then use ammonia as a fuel? You know, we think of it as a cleaning agent or something like that.
Yeah.
So what's the chemistry anyway?
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges with hydrogen is like I said, it's the smallest molecule in the world, and so you need to store it either in liquid form, which is very close to zero, not 0 degrees C, I mean 0 degrees Kelvin, that at which point it liquefies. So you need like cold temperatures and cold pressures, which is quite energy intense. Or you need very tight, and sophisticated engineering storage tanks. CSIRO, I believe, is actually helping to pioneer some of the storage materials and structures that we would need for hydrogen. So it is a challenge. Leakage is a problem. There are various issues around that. The way ammonia helps is that basically hydrogen is already used as a chemical feedstock. It's used in the chemical industry. So we have the Haber-Bosch process, which is where you take nitrogen out of the air, you combine it with hydrogen, and you create ammonia. And that's a process that's been used for over 100 years. Pretty standard chemistry, pretty standard industrial chemistry. We know how to do that. And now ammonia can be transported in liquid form, and the cooling and energy that needs to go into that. It's a one-step more process of doing it, but it is a much more stable thing to transport. You can so the thing about ammonia is it's not that dissimilar to methane, but it's a little, so you can just actually burn it. So you can burn it itself. What you need in order to not then turn it into NOx is scrubbers. But we have scrubbers in every catalytic converter engine, in every internal combustion engine not in the world, but most of them these days have that. So the technology that we have to remove those NOx out of the atmosphere is a well-developed technology. So one of the biggest concerns I had when I started getting into this, and he was hearing a lot from the industry around the potential for ammonia, and we can use ammonia for a fuel, but doesn't that create its own set of pollutants? Well, yes, it does, but what I am being told by the industry, and we'll take this with a grain of salt, is that they can reach all of the kind of air pollution compliance levels that are much more stringent than Australian air pollution compliance levels around NOx through existing or adaptation of existing technologies bolted on to the use of ammonia as a fuel for ships, or there's a proposal to run power stations in Japan off a certain degree of ammonia as well. So
sorry, Nicky,
yeah.
Nicky, can you just clarify NOx?
Sorry, you might have heard of SOx and NOx. They're sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides, and they are one of the air pollutants that isn't good for us and comes out of our coal-fired power stations and used to come out of our cars in really big ways before we moved to unleaded petrol, and still comes out of it, but in less quantities, and they are both an air pollutant and a toxin in their own right, but they also have greenhouse gas warming potential as well. So that's an area that we as environmentalists need to be very carefully looking out for. But in terms of if you look at burning coal or oil, which we know has no solution, we need a solution. An alternative solution. Hydrogen and particularly the ammonia pathway of hydrogen seems to be one of the better opportunities for those hard to decarbonise places and sectors. We shouldn't be using it and burning it in our coal-fired power stations because we don't need it. We have abundant renewable resources. We shouldn't be using it in petrol vehicles, or looking at and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. You wouldn't do ammonia vehicles, but even then, it's likely that electric vehicles will be more significant. So it's a whole area. When we start to get beyond electricity into some of these hard to decarbonise sectors, there's a whole bunch of new technology, it's a little bit dirtier, dirtier even than coal in terms of how do we navigate and develop those clean energy solutions.
Just to comment, it seems to me that one of the, sorry, Nicky,
yeah. No, you go.
Okay, it seems to me that one of the advantages of electric vehicles over hydrogen vehicles is that a hydrogen vehicle is still a form of internal combustion engine. So in terms of mechanics, you've still got gear changing to do, you've still got noise, whereas an electric vehicle is virtually silent, and because of the way it works, you don't need gear changing or anything. It's a much smoother ride.
Yeah, look, I think hydrogen fuel cells are a little bit more sophisticated than an internal combustion engine. So yeah, it's still a step up.
Okay.
Don't want to bag them out completely, but yeah, I think there's other benefits. I think there's sort of two questions I'm seeing. One is around water, and one is about the production of green steel. Shall I jump into those?
Yeah, thank you. Yep.
Yeah. So to generate renewable hydrogen, you basically need two things. You need electricity and you need water. And we know we are one of we know after Antarctica, we're the driest continent on Earth. So where's that water going to come from? And I think there's two options. One is around, can we use the creation of renewable hydrogen at scale to help develop a wastewater recycling industry? And really, because we're not going to drink it, we're going to turn it into hydrogen. So can we do some more around wastewater recycling? And then the second, if there isn't enough wastewater, then we can do desalination. And there are obviously challenges around desalination in terms of the saline, brackish water that can go in and affect aquatic ecosystems. But how do we create an industrial ecology that sits around this and go, well, is there a use for that salt? Are there other applications for it? Recently, I heard the idea that it could be a use for the tailings dams, that it could be, we could pull the water out and start to mine the tailings dams that are polluting, various parts of the country and the world, and use the water, but then help using the use of the water to mine the other minerals that are in those tailings dams. So there's sort of, that's one of the things that we're interested in looking at, is how do you make this as sustainable as possible? And there's quick ways, and there's you know, longer and more sustainable pathways. And I suppose the final thing that I would say in water is there are some places in Australia, like Tasmania, where they have abundant supplies of fresh water, and it's really not an issue. Oh, the final thing that I would say is that our coal industry in Australia uses a huge amount of water, and the back of the envelope calculations that we've done suggest that a renewable hydrogen industry would use less than our current coal industry does. So it still has some, you know, significant water usage, but less than our coal industry. So we are going in the right direction just by shifting away from coal to renewables and renewable hydrogen.
Is it possible to use seawater for electrolysis?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying around desalination. So we can use seawater and desalinate it, and there's a production technology that I understand is almost commercial, that will look at that will basically desalinate water and create hydrogen in basically one process.
Okay, Nicky, a couple of questions that I'll group together here about, you know, nasty byproducts, if you like. One of them is Stan is saying Santos is very confident they can bury the carbon dioxide from their form of hydrogen production. How practical is CCS these days? And maybe linked to that, or on the other side of the coin, is there a problem with the leakage of methane when transporting hydrogen? Somebody has heard this mentioned.
So hydrogen isn't methane.
Right.
So it's different chemical, different, you know, so there is problems about leakage of hydrogen. There isn't problems around leakage of methane because they're different things. If you are using methane to create hydrogen through that gas pathway that I mentioned, then potentially there's likely leakages. And that's why we need to decarbonize and move away from hydrogen from gas, hydrogen from renewables. And then the CCS question. Look, there are 19 CCS projects at scale in the world. The first one of those was built in the 70s, and at least a third of them are used via the oil industry to help extract more oil. So for all the talk of CCS, there are next to no projects. You know, if you think about renewables and how many, you know, thousands of renewable projects, and you know, the cost curve you have around renewables, and the exponential growth curve with the uptake, we just have not seen that with CCS. You know, the Gorgon project over in Western Australia, that was, you know, CCS was a requirement to open up this new gas project off the west coast of Western Australia. It will, over the life cycle, it will capture 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions from that project. Like, it's just, CCS continues to be this technology that the fossil fuel industry and its proponents use to justify its continued existence. So I am very skeptical about CCS, but let me put on my glass half full, or my optimistic hat, and go, I think there is a role for carbon capture and use for some productions, like the cement industry, which will be very difficult to decarbonize by itself. So you could capture the greenhouse gas and the carbon dioxide coming out of the cement process and put it into some other process and use it to create concrete or various different applications that use carbon dioxide, like making Coca-Cola, for example. There's various processes that use carbon dioxide. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Then I think in a decade's time, when we're really a lot further along, when we're at 150% renewables in Australia, and you know, the coal industry is practically, gone, and we're really moving away from gas, then I think there's a conversation to be had around using carbon capture and storage for drawdown, for drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, because I think we're probably going to need it to, keep the planet safe. But we can't have that conversation while the fossil fuel industry that is driving climate change is continuing to use it to justify and delay action, justify their existence and delay action on climate.
Great. Just quickly, Nicky, I see there was a very short question. When the sun's not shining, can we use ammonia? And I see you've actually answered it in the text. I don't know if anyone's seen it. The answer is yes. And
yeah, well, I think we would, when the sun's not shining, we would use hydrogen, but we probably don't need to in Australia. We can use pumped hydro and flexible demand and batteries. But in places like Japan, they might need to use ammonia, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and one more question. Can you make some comments about the use of locally produced hydrogen, for example, at a remote mine, versus large-scale production for export or making fuel ammonia? So I guess using hydrogen locally or shipping it out.
I think the answer is both, yes and. The most successful export industries that we have, well, any country has, it's not unique to Australia, is where you have a domestic demand or a domestic market for that commodity or product or service, as well as an export demand, because you help create the anchor customers, the expertise onshore, while you're building to the scale that you need to start exporting. So it's not mutually exclusive. We should be doing both. If you look at the Asian Renewable Energy Hub, they've expanded their plans, but the plans a year ago were to build 15 gigawatts or 16 gigawatts of renewables, wind and solar, with about a 70% capacity factor combined. It's amazing. And they have dedicated 5 gigawatts, or a third of that project, to help power and decarbonise northwest Western Australia, the towns and the mines up there, and that will be through both just direct electricity use, but potentially through the generation of and use of hydrogen up there as well. And then 10 gigawatts is planned for export, and they will do that project in stages, with the domestic piece being first and the export piece being second. So yes, that's why we need to stimulate a local hydrogen industry. Absolutely, we do. I would say we. We just need to do more.
Nicky, I know I'm going to use the term green steel because I know you don't like attaching the colours to things. But can you just give us a very brief rundown on that additional benefit of because everyone says, oh, we know you've got to use coal for making steel. Where are we with hydrogen as that final thing for steel? Yeah.
So just like I said, there's 3 pathways to making hydrogen. I'm going to bamboozle you and go, there's 3 pathways to making steel. Yeah. One is to take scrap steel, out of a building or something like that, and recycle it in an electric arc furnace. And that is the easiest way to create zero emission steel right now, is to use electricity to power an electric arc furnace, or to use renewables to power an electric arc furnace and recycle existing steel. So that's one option. The second pathway is you basically use coking coal and iron together, and it generates steel, and you need a certain carbon content. And then the third pathway is you use gas to reduce iron ore to what we call pig iron, and then you use an electric arc furnace to turn pig iron into steel. Now, what they're looking at is this gas pathway. Can you shift it from being fossil gas to hydrogen? And that's the pilot projects that are happening in Sweden and in Germany at the moment. looking at how you use this gas pathway and replace it with hydrogen and combine it with an electric arc furnace. Now, we don't have anything like that in Australia yet. We have billionaires like Sanjeev Gupta who are talking a big talk and talking about, decarbonising Whyalla Steel, or Liberty One Steel as it's now called in South Australia. And there are some pieces of the puzzle happening around that. We have green steel and green aluminium as a priority technology in the technology roadmap. And we have Twiggy Forrest and Fortescue Metals saying they are going to go big on renewables and renewable hydrogen. They're going to build 235 gigawatts of renewables, which is about 235% renewables for Australia. That won't just be in Australia, but it'll be globally. But that suggests to me, if you've got one of the largest iron ore exporters in Fortescue getting into renewables and hydrogen in the big way, they're probably going to do a green steel play. And their main focus, but their sole focus is Australia. So there are some pieces of the puzzle. Then there's also a report released about 6 months ago by the Grattan Institute that presents a pathway and a policy proposal for how we can grow a green steel industry in Australia. So there's work and it's nascent, but there is a huge opportunity. But I think I would say that the thing that we are missing is to develop a green steel industry. It's not energy policy. We need industry policy. We need a policy that develops industries. And in Australia, compared to the US and Europe and Japan and China, we are terrible at industry policy. So that's an area and a skill and a capability we need to build up in our governments, in our industry, and also in our, advocacy spaces as well.
Nicky, I'm conscious that you need to get away, but you've just taken us directly to my final question, which was a roundup anyway, and it was, we have learnt, I certainly have learnt a tremendous amount about the hydrogen possibilities tonight. I think everybody has, whether they're, some basic chemistry or some basic politics or some basic industrial processes. What, as a community group or as individuals, can we do to get behind this? You're campaigning. What can we do?
Sure. Well, the first is, if you're interested in knowing more, maybe I can suggest a few resources to look at. So we've got our Energising the Australian Economy with Hydrogen paper. There's a really great Bloomberg hydrogen paper from earlier this year, and Renew, I mentioned, also has a good paper. So that's the first thing. The second thing is learn how to talk about it to cut through the hype. Like, there's a lot of misinformation around this. And then I think the final area is, you guys are doing such great work campaigning against coal and gas. How do you start to target the gas industry and stop them from greenwashing what they're doing with the potential and extend their life with renewable hydrogen, hydrogen from coal and gas? So, I think there's those are some opportunities. There aren't hydrogen campaigns yet. It's not an area that anyone's developed a campaign around. But I think watch this space. And then, you're more than just community members. You work in, you have connections and things like that. Do you know anyone who works in the chemical industry? Do you know anyone who works in these industries, and how do you get them to start thinking about it? Like, who's in your networks? I had a big public campaign to go, hey, we want you to sign up and sign this petition and get active and do, this is the target. We're just not there yet. So keep doing what you're doing, and don't let the gas industry get away with pretending hydrogen is the solution for them.
Fantastic. Okay, look, that is really, really wonderful, Nicky. I would say that has been the most informative evening I've had on any of the climate change things, without any hesitation. Thank you. You've made it really clear. My last bit of school chemistry was half a century ago, so this helped. I'd like everybody either do a visible clap, or you've got a little button at the bottom where you can do a thumbs up if you want. But Nicky, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I hope it was useful and interesting and not too like this. But have a great evening, and I'll leave you to it.
Great. Now before everybody goes, thank you, Nicky. Before everybody goes, there is one more thing that I just want to draw everybody's attention to. Okay, so obviously we, as a group, we have expenses. Some of those are expenses of the hard work that some of the committee members and other supporters put in. The other expenses are actually dollars. You know, an awful lot of 226 stamps, for example, cost more than several people's memberships. If you are enjoying what we're doing, if you like this presentation, we would like you to consider joining us as an ongoing member, $30 a year. You can still give the money without joining and becoming a member. Or you can, I would imagine most people on this call are already getting our newsletter, but if you aren't, you can go to our website and you can sign up to get our newsletter, which comes out about once a month. We won't flood your inbox, but please do consider just coming a little bit closer to us one way or the other, with money in your hand or not. We really would appreciate it. And on that point, I think it's time to close the meeting. Say good night, everybody. Thank you for joining in, and to wish everybody all the best for this upcoming festive season, and for hopefully a better 2021 than a 2020. Good night, everybody.